Nikoli of the Cursed Nail. Free audiobook. Chapter 0. The Cursed Asylum. The Grace Field Mental Hospital is an insane asylum for children, ones who have committed horrible criminal acts but are too young to be tried as an adult, but too dangerous to be left in a normal hospital. Its 400 children are supervised by a mere 40 staff members, even though legally it's required to have one staff member per 4 children. But the place is criminally underfunded. Children are getting neglected. Headmaster Grace, the doctor who the institution is named after, is willfully neglecting the children and understaffing her facility for sheer personal profit. However, years and years of neglect have left the institution in a rotting state, and this institution is collapsing under the strain. The children are getting rowdy, rebellious, resistant, and their limited staff simply cannot keep up. With conditions getting as bad as they are, there aren't as many children being sent here. So with staff members quitting, funding being cut, and years and years of terrible management, the conflict at this hospital finally comes to a head. Chapter 1. The Cursed Child. Our story begins properly with Nikoli, an uncooperative inmate at Grace Field Mental Hospital. Nikoli is the most rebellious patient in this psychiatric hospital. He is not content to live his life here and lashes out, yelling, fighting with other patients, fighting with staff, biting, scratching, throwing random objects. The group therapy sessions have been unsuccessful. One-on-one therapy sessions have been unsuccessful. Nothing they say or do can make this child stay calm. They decide to take a different approach. They resort to drastic measures. They put a collar around Nikoli's neck, one that will shock him whenever he gets violent or refuses medication. To their surprise, Nikoli becomes even more violent and refuses to cooperate. Every single time they shock him for bad behavior, he gets worse. Not just in that moment as a form of retaliation, but long term. It's as if every shock to the neck also shocks his brain and fries some of its circuits. He slowly begins to stop talking entirely. He resorts to animalistic behavior. He's frequently seen running on all fours, growling at staff and other children. The staff are unequipped and uninterested to deal with this sudden and destructive change in behavior. It gets to the point where the only person in the entire hospital he will even speak to is his long-standing friend Michaela that he met when he first arrived. Michaela, a girl about the same age as him, both 10 years old, begin growing even closer. Every time Nikoli is mistreated, Michaela feels some degree of sympathy. The two begin to plot an escape. Michaela herself has a better than average treatment just because she is so well behaved, but by no means has excellent treatment. She's dirty, she's hungry, she's being given the wrong medication, but even still, it's better than the shock collar that Nikoli has been given. She plots to help him escape. When walking from the cafeteria to the lounge area, she fakes having a seizure, and when the staff rush towards her to see if she's okay, she starts lashing out, biting and scratching and flailing about. All of the available staff come running to try to restrain Michaela. Nikoli uses this moment to try and escape. He runs past the guards as quietly as he possibly can, them too distracted by Michaela's screaming and thrashing to pay him any mind. He runs for the front door, which is of course locked. He sneaks underneath the security desk, where the security officer is distracted watching TV. He pulls out a pin and a bent piece of metal that he uses as a torsion wrench. He gets up to the door, quietly stands up, puts in his torsion wrench, and starts picking at the pins. Click, click, click. 5 out of 6 pins snap into place before the security guard notices something out of the corner of his eyes, and he can hear Nikolai breathing. He turns off the TV and peers around the room to see Nikolai picking the final pin of the lock and opening the door. He leaps over the counter of his desk and chases Nikolai out the door. Nikolai is fast, much faster than the overweight security guard, but the security guard knows that he can't catch Nikolai and immediately resorts to pulling out the button for his shock collar that they gave the security guard. One button, and Nikolai is stunned. He seizes up, screeches in pain, but only for a moment, and then falls to the ground, writhing. The security guard holds down his thumb on the shock collar for several seconds, giving him time to walk over to Nikolai. And once he's at Nikolai, handcuffs in hand, ready to restrain him, he kneels down, continuing to hold down the button just to watch him squirm. He leans down to Nikolai and goes, "I can't stand you. Every day it's something new with you. So why don't you just sit here? Why don't you just sit here and feel these shocks? 'Cause I am so tired of chasing you around. And now you think you can escape? It's not happening, Nikolai." He leaves it on shock until his remote, or perhaps the collar, run out of battery. Nikolai, foaming at the mouth, trembling uncontrollably, is unable to move or speak. Only then does the officer handcuff Nikolai and start dragging him back inside. They replace his collar with a fresh one that's fully charged. And they also tie him up in a straitjacket and throw him in solitary confinement. They leave him there for 24 hours. There is no toilet. There is no food. No one checks in on him. And the room is padded, dampening the sound. He is trapped, defecating himself in a straitjacket and left to fester. Hungry, filthy, restrained, and shocked every time he complains, something changes within Nikolai. Instead of just being wild and unhinged, he becomes quiet. When they come to check on him, he doesn't resist. He doesn't respond. He doesn't even act like he notices them. As they take off his straitjacket and start to clean him up and give him food for the first time, he refuses to eat it. It's been 24 hours since he last ate, and he won't eat or take his medication. When they scream at him or hit him, he doesn't respond. Being unwilling to cooperate, they install a feeding tube. They put a tube down his nose and force feed him liquid food just so that he won't starve. With him at least being calm, they assume whatever issue was possessing him has passed, and they leave him in his room. Days go by, where Nikolai simply doesn't respond, not even to Michaela. He is completely shut down. But despite this, Michaela still talks to him. After a week, Nikolai finally begins to talk again, this time exclusively of escape. But the other children overhear their conversation, and not wanting another incident, they get told on. The guards come, and they grab Nikolai, and as they put him in a straitjacket, they also grab Michaela and attempt to put her in a straitjacket. Seeing that Michaela is being punished as well, Nikolai resorts to violence. But this time it's not random thrashing. There's no wild animal instinct anymore. It's just cold, dead-eyed, sociopathic violence for the purpose of causing another human being as much pain as physically possible. He pulls out a broken bottle, one that he had managed to capture from the ground before he escaped. He had grabbed the broken bottle and broken it with a rock, chipping it into the shape of a dagger, and wrapped it with tape and string to give it a handle. With his glass dagger, he, instead of thrashing and slashing wildly, he gets down as low as possible and thrusts the dagger forward directly into the ankle of one of the orderlies. He gets them between the bone and the tendon. He flicks his wrists and cuts the tendon. The tendon, which is always under pressure, snaps inside the muscle, causing intense, immediate pain and disabling the leg entirely. The orderly falls over, clutching his ankle. Nikolai doesn't react as he sees blood writhing and screaming from the orderly. Instead, he simply ducks under the hand of the other orderly and slashes his tendon as well. He grabs Michaela and the both of them begin to run. They do not get far. One of the orderlies with the slashed tendon has enough wherewithal to grab the button and hold it down on Nikolai. He falls to the ground. He looks at Michaela and begs her to run, but she refuses. She doesn't want to leave him behind. More staff members rush into the room, and both of them get absolutely swarmed and pinned to the ground and forced into straitjackets. They are both locked into solitary confinement on different wings of the psychiatric ward. Grace Fields becomes increasingly tired of Nikolai's rebellious behavior. She becomes fascinated with Nikolai and she tries to examine his file, but she discovers that there isn't one. All of his history, who his parents were, his medical history, even something as simple as where he came from appears to be gone, be it a clerical error, or willful negligence, or active malice. She's unable to find out any information about Nikolai. Even what was recorded of him in the hospital itself is gone. She begins to believe that documents are being intentionally disposed of when her own record of him, her own personal notes, are also gone. Someone is stealing his documents, and she thinks it might be him. She releases him from solitary confinement. When the orderlies allow her to step into his solitary confinement cell to speak to him, he appears, at first, to be fully secure. But in fact, he is not. He had somehow managed to find a nail from the floorboards and pulled it out during the struggle and hidden it amongst his clothes. And for the past 12 hours of solitary confinement, he has slowly stabbed and cut his way out of his restraints, and he was simply waiting for a chance to lash out. When Grace Fields kneels down to Nikolai to get down to head level, he lunges at her with the nail and spikes it into her eye. The orderlies immediately whip out their buttons, their control units for his shock collar. It falls to the floor, and he is completely free. He rushes them, stabbing them in the knees, wedging the nail between the complex joints of the patella, disabling both of their knees in quick, fluid, targeted strikes. He runs towards the door. The orderlies are alerted immediately. This time they are ready. One of them had the idea of purchasing rubber bullets with a loaded pistol. He grabs Nikolai by the arm and pulls him back, puts the gun to his head, and pulls the trigger, firing a rubber bullet directly into his skull. I guess he didn't read the instructions, because these are supposed to be fired at people from 20, 30, 40 feet away, and he shot a 10-year-old child in the skull at point-blank range. It doesn't pierce the skin, but it breaks it, tears it, peels it back from the skull. He is given an instant concussion and is knocked unconscious. Realizing that Nikolai is too dangerous and too crafty to simply be thrown into solitary confinement in a straitjacket, they resort to even more drastic measures. Furious with his constant escape attempts, the orderlies don't merely put him back in a straitjacket and a shock collar. This time, they drive nails through the shock collar, these nails pointing outwards. So, any attempt to wrestle with it would only cut his hands as he tried to do so. They put his hands behind his back and drive a pair of nails through each hand. The two nails cross each other, giving him a sort of double stigmata through both palms. And these are no mere nails, these are very, very large spikes. And these spikes have had slight serrations cut into them. So if he tries to pull his hands apart, the serrations will do more damage to his hand. Then, and only then, do they fit him with a custom straitjacket. This time, these buckles cannot be unfastened. The locks on them cannot be picked. It is not made of weaker fabric. It is made of extremely sturdy material with absolutely no way to escape without cutting your way out. Every seam of the straitjacket is sewn together with dense cord. As a final act of ensuring that Nikolai has absolutely no method of escape whatsoever, they tie him up. They put a rope under both of his arms and tie him to the ceiling, suspended just high enough off the ground so it is impossible for him to touch the ground or either of the walls. He is stuck. They intend to leave him there, in this state, for 24 hours. They station 2 guards directly outside of his cell. They are both given tasers this time, not rubber bullets, for they don't want to have any clear, difficult-to-heal signs of abuse. They are told that if they hear anything loud, to not enter, but to open the meal slot and look inside, because he might just be creating a noise to lure them in so he can escape. They're also given tear gas canisters, so if that he manages to escape, they can throw a tear gas canister in the room, close the meal slot, and simply gas him out. But Nikolai, even in this horrid state, manages to at the very least attempt another breakout. Knowing full well it would damage his hands beyond repair, Nikolai still pulls his hands apart. With 2 nails facing opposite directions, he slowly pulls his hands apart, the serrated edges slicing into his hand, but he makes sure not to scream in pain, so as to not alert the guards. Once his hands are separated, the serrated edges make perfect tools for cutting himself loose. He cuts the straps of the straitjacket and leaves them dangling, tattered. He attempts to unfasten shock collar on his neck, but there is no buckle, there is no lock, it is sewn shut. And the more he tries to mess with it, the more the nails simply pierce his hands. And with the spike stuck in his hand still, he doesn't have a very good grasp. He gives up. He leaves the outward-facing nails in the leather of his shock collar and decides to write it off as a lost cause. Nikolai gets to the door, and it is at this point that he just starts rapping the nail embedded in his hand against the door. The guards look in, they peer through the meal slot. One of them peers through the meal slot, and as soon as his eyes are visible, Nikolai slams his hands forward through the meal slot and punctures the guard through both eyes. Upon retracting his hands, the guard's eyeballs are still attached. The guard shrieks in pain, and the second guard takes out his tear gas canister, throws it inside, and closes the meal slot. The tear gas burns Nikolai's throat and eyes, but he simply sits down, closes his eyes, and attempts to meditate, and waits for the tear gas to subside. Once the security guard is certain that Nikolai has been incapacitated, he opens the door. And as soon as he opens the door, Nikolai charges through and slashes both of his calves with the nails embedded in his hand. Falling over, the guard pulls out the button to the shock collar and presses it. Nikolai feels the shock, stumbles for a moment, then, through sheer force of willpower, continues to move forward. It gets to the point where even as other guards pile in and they also push down on his shock collar, he is able to get to a full sprint and just push past it. They try to tackle him, but anyone who gets close gets cut. He goes through every single one of the orderlies, one by one, dismantling them, cutting their legs, their hands, and a few of them, who tried just a little too hard to stop him, got stabbed in the throat. Instead of going through the front door, where more orderlies are waiting for him, he instead runs towards the lounge. He runs towards the windows. They're tempered glass, but there are no iron bars. He runs forward, jumps, and slams both hands spike first into the tempered glass window. The spikes add just enough force to shatter it, and he is able to run out the lounge window. He sprints off into the woods. The few remaining staff members who are still able to chase after him do so, constantly pressing the shock button that has fully stopped working on him. They run, and they run, and they run, but none of them are particularly physically fit, and Nikolai has the endurance and speed of a child. And while capturing Nikolai is nothing more than a job to them, Nikolai is running for his survival. Even with his wounds, he has every advantage, and manages to run off into the woods, where they very quickly lose track of him. Chapter 2. The Cursed Friend. Amongst the woods is a system of limestone caves, barely visible through the weave of trees. Nikolai finds what appears to be an unoccupied cave and runs inside. He gets in deep. The overcast, dim sunlight doesn't reach. He rests his back against the wall and slides down. He is exhausted. He sits there for a moment and tries to pry the nails from his hands, but he is completely unable to. His skin, his muscle, has become swollen, inflamed, blistered. The inflammation on his hands are just holding the spike more firmly in place. He gives up and takes a desperately needed nap in freedom. 3 hours later, the search party for him ends. The sun is set, and Nikolai is left to fend for himself in a dark and cold cave. He can't see anything, but he can still hear, and he hears the scurrying of rats within the cave. He lunges towards the sound. He fails many times, but all he needed to do was succeed once. He drives his spiked hand through a rat in the cave ground, piercing it. He has no plates, he has no fork, he has no stove, he has no fire. He hasn't even killed the rat. But when you haven't eaten in hours, barely eaten in days, you don't care. Ridden with disease and parasites, this still alive, squirming, shrieking rat finds itself beheaded by the teeth of Nikolai. He kills it as quickly as possible, just to silence the incessant screeching, and devours it. Fleas, ticks, fur, dirt and all, even the bones. For 3 days, he lives in this cave, feeding off the filthy rats, his hands getting infected, cold, piercing winds blowing into the cave. Anything resembling humanity or compassion that was left inside of him is completely gone. He is delirious, cold, hungry, and desperate. He starts getting visions of his time spent within the institution, constantly being berated and insulted, beaten for stepping out of line, and then, of course, quoting the Bible at him. They'd forced him to read the Bible over and over many times. They weren't allowed to have entertaining things like children's books, or read the radio or watch TV or play games. With the exception of a small handful of Christian literature and Christian-themed board games, the Bible was the only thing he had read for several years. And incoherent phrases spoken by people he can't even envision anymore start flooding his mind. A passage from Kings invades his mind. Now, Ahaziah has fallen through the lattice of his upper room in Samaria and injured himself. So he sent his messengers, saying to them, "Go and consult Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, to see if I will recover from this injury." But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, "Go up and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there's no God in Israel that you are going off to consult Beelzebub, the god of Ekron?" The word Beelzebub rings in Nikolai's head. Beelzebub, Beelzebub. Will I recover from the injury? Beelzebub. He shakes his head and tries to retain some semblance of sanity, but another passage from the book of Matthew rings in his head. It is only by Beelzebub, the prince of hell, that Jesus drives out these demons. The name Beelzebub rings throughout his head over and over and over, and he starts seeing demonic visions invading his mind. But these visions of the demon Beelzebub don't come to him as a threat. They come to him as a solution. He hears whispers in his mind, whispers that promise vengeance. It is only by Beelzebub, the prince of hell, that he drives out demons. It is only by Beelzebub, the prince of hell, that he drives out demons. See if I will recover from this injury. Go and consult Beelzebub, Beelzebub, Beelzebub. Nikolai starts completely losing his mind, shrieking the name Beelzebub out loud in a cave, his own words echoing back to him. Beelzebub, lord of the flies, Prince of Hell, God of Ekron, is it true that I can consult you about my injuries? Is it true that you can drive out demons? If you are willing to make a deal with me, give me a sign." He falls to his knees, shaking, sobbing, delirious, diseased. He blinks his eyes, and it is suddenly dimly lit in the cave with red light. He can hear buzzing, a horrible, demonic buzzing, coming from all directions. He gets to his feet, and he starts looking around. All he sees are the faint black dots of flies swarming towards him. He panics and tries to run, but every direction he thinks to run, there are simply more flies. They reach him, but they don't attack. Instead, they spiral around him, spinning, 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 making him dizzy. He can't make out which direction is which. He is completely lost, swatting madly at the flies. He becomes dizzy and sick and falls to his hands and knees. "Beelzebub, I beg of you," Nikoli cries. The flies stop swarming in this circular pattern and start swarming together. They coalesce into a vaguely humanoid shape. He hears a voice coming from the vaguely humanoid cloud of flies. "What do you desire, child?" the swarm of flies asked. "Revenge!" Nikoli cried. "Revenge?" the flies asked. "Revenge I can do, but you'll need to be stronger if you plan on seeking vengeance." "Can you bless me with strength and good health?" Nikoli asked. "A blessing?" The swarm of flies laughed in his face. "I am the Prince of Hell, child. I don't do blessings. I do curses." "I'll do anything for the strength to kill my abusers," Nikoli says. "Are you sure you're willing to sell your immortal soul to a demon for a moment of brutality and satisfaction?" "Without hesitation." "Then your curse is my command." There's the sound of snapping fingers. The cloud of flies disappears, and Nikoli passes out. Chapter 3. The Cursed Powers. Nikoli wakes up in a cold sweat. His body is covered in nails. He looks at his hands. The infection and inflammation appear to be gone. But it's not just the infection that is gone. It's his overwhelming sense of cold. It's no longer the bitter, painful cold of the approaching winter, but instead this dull, numbing cold. Something just barely tolerable, so as to not cripple him. His sense of hunger is completely gone. In fact, most of his senses feel either completely numbed or have this strange, mildly painful tingle to him. He feels no desire to pursue his bodily functions. Judging by how his body feels, he's not even sure he has them anymore. He looks down at his hands. Growing out from underneath the fingernail of each of his fingers is a nail. A long, large, 9-inch nail out from underneath each fingernail. The nails look painful. It looks like they had to shatter his fingertips just to escape. But again, he feels no severe pain when he touches them. Just this tingling, numbing, almost static-like sensation where pain ought to be. As he examines his hands, he points a single finger at the wall and just sort of focuses at a dim spot in the wall. He flexes his fingertip, holding it out straight, and the nail fires. It fires with a crack, almost like a gunshot, but without the bang of gunpowder. The nail shoots forward and pierces the stone cave wall. After a second or two of having been fired, the nail begins to grow again, regenerating from underneath his fingernail. He slowly watches in a strange combination of fear and fascination as he watches 9 inches worth of steel grow from his fingertip. He smiles. He looks at one of the stray flies left behind, and he aims his fingernail at one of them. He blinks a few times. It's very dark in the cave, and he can't really make out exactly where the fly is. He blinks again, and suddenly he can see in the dark, near perfectly. But not color vision. the sort of colorblind night vision you might get from getting accustomed to a dim environment, but it is pitch black, and it is definitely not in grayscale. It is in shades of red and black. But amongst the pool of red and black, there is detail, fine detail, acute detail, beyond the best prescription, beyond the best that LASIK could ever offer you. He can zoom, and he can magnify. He zooms in on the fly, and as he holds a finger towards it, his hand, his arm, his entire body jerks slightly, as if locking on. As the fly buzzes around the room without effort, he is able to lock onto the fly and passively track it as it moves. He fires the nail. There's the crack. The nail shoots forward and pins the fly to the cave wall. It was easy. And if he can pin a fly to a wall, then he can kill a man. He feels ready. He feels this strange mix of emotions brewing from inside of him. He feels an emotion so much stronger than rage, but also not rage at all. It's a sort of acceptance, a sort of duty, a compulsion to fulfill a mission. And in that moment he realizes he'd be willing to die if it meant killing every single person in that asylum. At the very least, killing the staff members. Michaela, he had no desire to harm in any way, shape, or form. He was ready, and he was calm. He left the cave, his telescopic red vision allowing him to scan acres of territory in seconds. He zoomed in on the school and was able to study it from miles away. By the time he got within normal human vision of the institution, he had already examined it top to bottom and come up with a strategy. But after hours of coming up with a strategy, he decided that in reality he didn't need one. He had been given power by a demon, and that power was the strength to commit vengeance. The plan that he had spent hours concocting he threw to the wayside, and instead went on a head-on rampage. He sprinted towards the front door, and from 100 feet away, he fired a single nail at the lock. The nail shot out with a crack, punched into the lock. It shattered the lock with such intensity, it was as if the lock had exploded. It was a kinetic impact beyond what even a bullet could accomplish. Wood splintered, metal fragmented. He sprinted across those 100 feet between himself and the door at superhuman speed. He jumped and kicked the door off his hinges. The security guard, who was by his TV behind his counter, the security guard, who was normally distracted by his TV, fell out of his chair and scrambled backwards as Nikoli invaded the asylum. He looked at Nikoli and said, "What happened to you? I thought you died." Nikoli said, "I haven't died." And effortlessly he jumped onto the counter and raised a finger at the guard. "But you're going to." And he fired a nail at the guard, piercing him in the jugular vein. "All of you are going to die." Nikoli laughed. The whole idea that they could stop him just seemed funny to him. So as orderlies, as staff members, as concerned children all gathered around, he just laughed at the absurdity that they thought for a moment that they could stop him. He splayed out all 10 fingers, each fingertip locking onto a random body. He tilted his head back, laughed, and tensed his fingers, and shot 10 people at once. Tall, muscular, fit orderlies, overweight, middle-aged, miserable staff members, and even some of the children. Body, 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 body. There was just this sickening thud as body after body collapsed to the ground. Some of them got hit in the throat, some the eye, some directly in the forehead, piercing the brain. 2 of them were even pierced through the ear directly into the brain. But one unlucky child was merely pierced through the chest. Pierced through the heart, but a nail to the heart was not an instant kill. Nikoli, seeing that he managed to leave one of them suffering, walked over as the nails regenerated within his fingertips. The child, who you would expect to be terrified, simply wasn't. He looked at Nikoli with gratitude, and he smiled and said, "End me. I can't do this anymore. The nails in Nikolai's fingertips grew back, and he goes, I know, and I'm sorry it had to come to this. And he fired a nail through the child's head. As more staff members came rushing in, they saw the carnage, and they tried to run. The fact that they tried to run made Nikolai laugh hysterically. He smiled. The edges of his lips couldn't stretch as far as he wanted them to smile as big as he wanted to, so he took the nails and cut open his cheeks so that he could smile from ear to ear. He chased after them one by one. He shot one of them down in the hallway. Another tried to hide in the bathroom, but he chased her down into the stall, ripped the door off its hinges, and shot her. Another tried to run to her bedroom, slam the door shut, and lock it. He drop-kicked the door off its hinges, laughed at her, and fired several at her. She grabbed her pillow and put it in front of her chest at the last moment so that the nails would pierce only pillow. Nikolai couldn't stop laughing at how futile it all was. Seeing that she had a limited but effective barrier in front of her chest, he instead aimed low and fired 2 nails, one at each foot, nailing her feet to the ground. She shrieked in pain and tried to pull her feet out. You could see the nail get slowly pulled out of the wooden floorboards, blood dripping down the nail. As she was so focused on pulling out her feet from the floor, she moved the pillow, just enough to expose part of her neck. There was a crack. The nail went in, and she was dead. When she fell down, one of her feet was still stuck in the floor, so she fell in an awkward position, her ankle cracking as her foot was still flat against the ground, but so was she. It was such a funny position to him. He couldn't help but laugh. It was all so ridiculous. It was all so stupid. It was all so funny. No one could tell you how long he rampaged in the asylum for. Was it hours? Toying with his victims? Was it minutes? No one was sure. All 40 of the staff members fell. A small handful of the children who were too far gone to be saved had also fallen. But the rest of them simply huddled in fear in various parts of the asylum. Nikolai gathered the children, herding them like sheep to the slaughter, forcing them into the lounge room. He said, "Children, don't be scared. I'm here to save you. I know it doesn't look like it, and I know I had to get just a little bit bloody, but I am your hero. I'm here to save you. Look at what I did for you. I killed the people who oppressed us." But the children looked back at him and said, "But who will feed us? Who will wash the clothes? Who will do the dishes? Who's going to go to the store and buy more food?" Nikolai waved their concerns and he says, "It doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter. What will we do when the police arrive?" Nikolai paused. "To be completely honest, I didn't think I'd survive this far." Nikolai looks down at his hands. These hands were meant for war, and the war is won. I expected to die, getting my vengeance, but I'm still alive. This is so much worse. I wasn't supposed to survive. Nikolai points the nails at himself, all 10 of them locking into place around his neck. Michaela steps up and she says, "Don't you dare, Nikolai. Not after everything you put us through. You did this. You fix it." Nikolai took a moment. He lowered his fingers. "Well, I suppose we're all hungry, aren't we? Let me wash up and see if I can't find some food." As Nikolai washed off and went into the kitchen, he looked at Michaela and he said, "You know, I saw some of them get to their phones. I suppose the police should be coming. It's a long drive from the nearest city, but they'll get here eventually." Michaela said, "I was following you as you were on your adventure, and I didn't see any of them get to a 3rd digit. I don't think anyone's coming. It's all up to you. You did this, and now you have to take care of everyone." Nikolai said, "Well, then, I'll do what I can." Nikolai summoned some of the older children, some of the teenagers, and instructed them to prepare some food. He instructed others to wash some of the clothes, and he demanded that everyone at least learn something. And for a few days the system seemed to work. The older children had been put to work within the asylum anyway, and most of them knew the ins and outs of how everything worked. So by simply teaching the other children what they already knew, they were able to keep things going, but only to an extent. After a few days, they ran out of food. Nikolai had prepared for the lack of food. He took Michaela and some of the older children to the freezer. Inside the freezer were body parts. Large chunks of cleaved human meat hung from hooks. He goes, "We are not out of food. We're just out of normal food. We still have some condiments. We still have spices. And we have meat. Make do." The older children immediately seem repulsed. "We are not going to feed people to other people. That is cannibalism. Nikolai, you cannot do this. You are insane." And Nikolai aims a nail at them. They immediately fall silent. "What do you expect me to do? Children are hungry. No one is coming to save us. And there is plenty of meat." The older children leave for a moment and talk it over. They come back after a few minutes and they go, "I don't like this. I don't like this at all. But our only other option is to call the police and have them come and see what state we're living in. They'll, without a doubt, simply round us all up and ship us to some other facility, possibly multiple. We'll all be split up. We'll be back where we came from, in some other cramped, underfunded, understaffed location. Nothing will improve. So we decided it's worth it." Nikolai said, "Well then, I guess it's decided. Serve it. Serve the meat." Chapter 5. The Cursed Battle. A week goes by, and things seem to improve. They run out of medication, but they had mostly stopped taking it anyway. A few children without their seizure medication had intense grand mal seizures and passed away. Some other children left without supervision with suicidal tendencies ended their own lives. After a week, between the children that had been directly murdered by Nikolai, the ones that had seizures, and the ones that killed themselves, 400 children was reduced to 350. A dark blessing, as that was as much as they could sustain with their current system. But even after a week, even the human meat started to run out. No one is sure exactly who did it. Possibly no one called in, and someone simply called in a wellness check because no one at the facility had come home. Whatever the reason, the police came. The police knock on the door. Nikolai answers. His hands, with the nails sticking out, were hidden by oven mitts. His face was weary. He had bags under his eyes and wrinkles forming around his face. He simultaneously looked 10 years old and 90. The police officers look revolted by his mere presence. The younger of the two police officers squats down to Nikolai's level. He goes, "Hey there, little buddy, can you tell me where the person who runs this place is?" And Nikolai replies, "I ate her heart with a side of brown rice and a juice box." The police look at each other very concerned, and they look past Nikolai. Normally I'd take that as a joke, but this place looks like it's gone straight to hell, the officer said, looking around the decrepit building. "You're a creepy kid, you know that? Being pleasant isn't my priority," Nikolai said. "We're coming in. Move out of the way." Nikolai stretched out his hand to block their path. "Why?" "To investigate, of course. We need to make sure you kids are being looked after." "And if they're not?" "Then you'll all need to go to another institution. Another government-run hellhole. No thanks. You can leave." Nikolai dropped the oven mitts that covered his hands, exposing the nails that were embedded in his fingertips. One of the cops draws his taser. The other draws his gun. "It wasn't a request, kid. Move!" Nikolai panics and fires his fingertip nails at both of the officers, piercing them between their eyes, killing them instantly. At least he now had some food for the day. Now, ordinary workers not coming home, people will tolerate that for a time, but when a police officer goes missing, the police investigate, and investigate they did. When the officers don't report back within the end of their shift, more officers come, and this time they send several cars. With no response to them on the radio or their cell phones, more and more start to pile in. As they examine the area and they look at the asylum, they see the boarded up windows, they see nails, they look at the boarded up windows and the creepy atmosphere. When they see that the vehicle the other officers had arrived and was still there, but that the officers did not come out when called. They called in backup. The SWAT team arrived to back up the police. They surround the building. It takes until midnight until they are fully in formation. 24 members of SWAT and the police were ready with rifles, shotguns, and pistols. One of them gets out a megaphone, and they demand surrender. They hound everyone in the institution with orders to come out peacefully and promises that they won't be hurt. Michaela looks at Nikolai and says, "Maybe we should just surrender." "Never," Nikolai said, walking forward, growing nails on his hands. "Don't do it. They're good people. They're just doing their job." "Silence," Nikolai says, walking past Michaela and kicking open the door. A door that was merely propped up against the doorframe. As the police blare at him through their megaphones and tell him to surrender, Nikolai refuses. He raises both hands, waits for his fingers to lock on a target, and fires. 10 of the 24 men gone in an instant. The police open fire. Nikolai starts taking bullets to the chest, pistol and rifle fire pummeling him. He falls to his knees as he feels his chest ripped open. He opens his arms and embraces the gunfire. He wanted to die. There's a pause as the police needed to reload their weapons. Nikolai looked down and saw the holes in his chest started to close. He was not going to die. There was no easy way out. So he decided to finish what he started. This is when the police with riot shields started to charge in, but they, although only armed with pistols, men behind them with shotguns came to the ready. They surrounded him and started to blast him with shotgun shells. The buckshot pummeled his body, and it disoriented him. It hit him with enough force to push him around. Nikolai went feral. He leapt into the air and fell on one of the SWAT officers from over top of their shield and just impaled him through the skull with all 10 of his nails. He ripped them out and just went mad, slashing at the other officer with the shotgun. And like a wild animal, he just leapt from officer to officer, slashing madly. Shield after shield was bashed into him to get him to retreat and give them space. Gunfire ripped through him from all directions. But he was unstoppable. He managed to cut down every single man to the last one. But the last man standing was the last man standing for a reason. He was hiding in the truck bed. And he didn't simply have guns. He had a grenade belt. The officer pulled the ring on the grenade belt, waited for them to cook, and as Nikolai leapt forward, landing on the top of the truck, eyeing the officer in the truck bed, the officer threw the grenade belt at him and jumped out of the truck bed and rolled underneath the truck. The grenades went off simultaneously, all 6 grenades exploding in unison. Nikolai was obliterated. He was wounded beyond what his healing factor could compensate for. He was nothing more than broken bones, ripped apart flesh and blood, and he was just left to splatter across the front lawn of the Grace Fields Mental Hospital. It was finally over. Chapter 6. The curse ends. As the one remaining officer looks around at the fragments of what used to be Nikolai, he takes a moment to breathe, and then he calls in what happened. More police arrive. Multiple counties pool in their officers to surround the institution and investigate what happened. They uncover evidence of the horrible abuses the children suffered. It makes national news. Parents were shocked and appalled at the treatment of their children. The general public was in an uproar. The police round up the children and ship them off to other institutions. What remained of Nikolai was merely scooped up into an evidence bag and buried. After a few weeks, the attention and the buzz and the outrage faded, and people moved on and forgot. He had either stolen or destroyed all the documents that proved he even existed, so they didn't even know what his name was. So they simply wrote on his gravestone what Michaela told them his name was, Nikolai. No last name, no birth date, no message, just Nikolai. Michaela came to visit his grave from time to time, leaving flowers, making prayers. After 3 weeks, she set down some more flowers, and she apologized and told Nikolai's grave that this would be the last time she's going to be able to come visit him because her new foster parents were going to move to another state. She said her final goodbye to Nikolai and left the graveyard. As the sun dipped below the horizon and she got in her foster parents' car, a nail-covered hand shot from under the grave. An adult's hand clasped the child's hand and pulled upwards. Nikolai was uprooted like a buried vegetable. A woman in chainmail armor greeted him. "My name is Hadassah Abraham. I'm forming a team of incredible people to fight supernatural threats." Nikolai said, "I am the supernatural threat. There are things much more threatening than you, and we need your help to defeat them. We can give you food, shelter, camaraderie, even money. What do you say?" "Friends?" she asks him. "I suppose I could use a friend," Nikolai replied, shaking her hand. As their two hands clapped together, thunder rolled across the cloudy night sky. The end.